The Starside Prophecy by Tirri. Read by the author. Chapter 9. The Count. The briefing room was abuzz with activity, but Gwendolen, sitting in a recliner, was oblivious to it. She was in the flow of performing the required preparatory mental exercises for establishing the correct energy balance to ensure the success of her upcoming mission. The briefing room offered exceptional views of the square below, and the recovery rooms to the rear did also. The transfer rooms were located deep within the soundproofed interior. These rooms had no windows. 2 other dispensers had checked in. One was doodling while talking on the phone to a mission coordinator, and the other was snoozing in a recliner, a common sight. A power nap before precision focus was always helpful. Gwendolen stood up and walked over to the refreshment area. She poured herself a cup of coffee, which she took back to her chair. The parameters of her revised mission took up 3 pages, offering suggestions for maximum efficiency, all of which could be ignored at the dispenser's discretion. Gwendolen groaned. The mission was an extraction. A lost soul, now considered permanently estranged from his higher self, needed to be brought back home. Extractions were not particularly common, but when the necessity arose, the extraction needed to be timely. The lost souls, who were considered harmless, were permitted to remain in the physical to live out their natural lives, and thus back streets, alleyways and abandoned buildings were full of the homeless and the forgotten. Star-sized missionaries were routinely sent in to offer solace, but relatively few were able to penetrate the awareness of those existing in such a loveless reality, a reality ignored by more fortunate souls comfortably able to turn their backs. Indifference of this kind had its own set of karmic consequences. Spanish aristocrat Viscount Lucero Fernandez Eduardo Aguado, however, was not considered harmless. Far from it. He was Gwenolen's target. The Count, of ancient noble descent, had been born with karma pending from his previous existence as Tomás de Torquemada, the first Grand Inquisitor of Spain. Now he had added to the bleak account. After murdering another prostitute, his guide had decided that he was too far gone to change his behaviours, and an extraction had been ordered. It was the only way to prevent him from ruining the life plans of the innocent. Due to the Count's sense of entitlement, coupled with a supremely vindictive temperament, the still small voice within him that called for correction had not even been heard. For a very long time, the Count's thoughts had been frantic, all-consuming and unremitting, and at a certain point the clamouring of his thinking mind had gained such a momentum that he found it impossible to hear even a whisper of self-reproach. During the course of human history, many lost souls had been removed, who, like the Count, had literally lost their minds. Gwendolen herself had brought home a fair number, delivering them straight into the arms of Salvatore. Gwendolen looked up. 2 more dispensers had entered the room to prepare for their upcoming missions. Gwendolen mouthed, "Hi guys," and continued with her brief. The Count was still a level 2, and from his previous existence in the 16th century, his cruel personality had resurfaced in a new body that was portly and unremarkable. The Count wore built-up shoes which gave him some extra stature, and he made sure his hair was permanently swept back, giving him another valuable inch or 2. The Count spent a lot of time looking in the mirror, but his contempt for his appearance just added to the disgust he already had for a world that he thought must not be taken seriously. During the Middle Ages, hundreds of women had been burnt at the stake under Torquemada's zealous supervision. His life as a religious bigot and cruel fanatic ended in Avila when at the age of 72 he died of a staph infection. After returning to the mists, his initial urge had been to head for the caves, where he spent several years growling at those entering to help. Eventually he had been coaxed out by a rescuer, after which he remained under the care and supervision of those at the Department of Energy Realignment. Torquemada had eventually been granted permission to re-enter the physical to pay back a portion of his karmic debt and to work on improving deviant mental patterns. Precise and quite savage conditions favourable for the intense experience had come to the Count at a very early age. after which opportunities for growth had presented themselves. All had been squandered. The Count had once again succumbed to the ravaging effects of projecting his inner torment onto those unfortunate souls who had attracted negativity into their own experience through the mismanagement of their own thoughts. Salvatore had personally consented to the Count's current life, but the payout had been poor and a great deal more karma had been accrued, and so the Count's extraction had been ordered because it was pointless to allow him to remain in an existence that could teach him nothing. The choice would soon be his. He could undergo another lengthy period of restoration before any further attempts at progress could be consented to, or he could re-enter the caves to dwell amongst those also too frightened to deal with their mess. Gwendolen turned to the second page of her brief. The horror movie script spoke of the Count's recent antics. It was late at night, and the Count's thumbs were swollen, as had been the prostitute's neck. The Count's body was aching from the physical exertion of the strangulation, because he had been met with a great deal of resistance. But the feeling of euphoria brought on by his latest victim's frantic attempt to remain alive was worth it. As the prostitute's body floated in the estuary leading to the Atlantic Ocean, the Count secured his cape under his chin with a tortoiseshell toggle and pulled the hood over his head. He kept his head down as he headed into the back streets of Vigo Pontevedra to his parents' ancestral apartments. After closing the front door behind him, the Count glanced up approvingly at the Lord Jesus, who had one hand raised in blessing and his other extended outward. The oil painting had been given to his ancestors by the King of Spain during the 17th century, and his mother had been the eventual recipient of the heirloom. The Count's mother was in her drawing room, staring at the image of the tower drawn from her tarot deck. The cards were spread over a brass table next to a bottle of sherry and an ashtray full of cigarette stubs. Each tip had a ring of red around the filter, suggesting endless applications of a lipstick thought to enhance her appearance. It didn't. The bright colour always bled into the lines around her mouth. The Count's mother had not heard her son arrive home. The Count's father, Don Alonso, already drunk, was sitting on a worn leather settee in the corner of his library, dogged by thoughts he could not stop. Don Alonso had heard the arrival of his effeminado son, the heir and firstborn he had always detested. He had not spoken to his son since he had tried and failed to stab him over speculations about his perverted sexual preferences 2 years ago. His estranged wife, the Marchesa, always insisted on protecting the boy, and he had had no choice but to go along with her decision and turn a blind eye. She was the one with the titles and the money. The Count remained in seclusion for a week in his suite, reading, sipping cognac and thinking about the whore whose soul he had just freed. So far the Count had carefully picked unfortunates that no one cared about, and so their bodies were unclaimed, and the bitches were quickly forgotten. Soon he would be free again to prowl in search of new emotions in the city that had once belonged to his ancestors and now belonged to him. Gwendolen closed the brief and shook her head ruefully. By tomorrow night the Viscount Lucera would be back Starside under the watchful care of those at the Department of Returns, and then the hard part would begin, the review, the systematic analysis of his life. The process would be long and drawn out. Although Gwendolen knew this was an integral part of the overall project celebrated every night at the restaurant for all its triumphs and tragedies, this soul's immediate future would be suitably and rightfully tough. Gwendolen knew her reaction might be considered stingy, but from her experience this freak was close to irretrievable. Salvatore would, of course, give her a sermon on the necessity of hope and the sanctity of compassion, and she would listen as she always did, usually over spaghetti and meatballs with Justinia nodding in agreement. "Look how well I turned out, Gwen," he would say, "and as you know, I got off to a very rocky start." Gwendolen was overqualified for this type of job, but due to the recent cunning of the subject to be removed, namely his ability to convert negative emotion into physical strength, she was an obvious choice. For Gwendolen, the mission was ugly but straightforward enough, and for someone with her skill set, it was likely to take no more than an hour or two. Gwendolen finished her coffee. It was time to enter the mental space that would prevent divergent thoughts from corrupting her focus. In 15 minutes from now she would transfer, which gave her just enough time to take care of her appearance and collect some essentials. Gwendolen left the briefing room and walked down the hallway to a room 4 doors away. The closet, as it was known, an open and brightly lit space, was stark except for a smooth white countertop that ran the length of the far wall and several freestanding mirrors. These were strategically positioned in the middle of the room so dispensers could get a 360 view of their appearance. Few male dispensers bothered with details like hemlines and accessories, but these were important to the ladies. Gwendolen needed a little black dress, some high heels, a clutch full of euros, a comb, some hairpins and some cosmetics. A door at the back of the closet opened and Jeannie walked in. Jeannie had already read the dispenser's mission parameters and was expecting Gwendolen. In orderly and endless alphabetical rows, Jeannie could find anything from a 14th century timepiece to a 9mm Beretta, or a simple corsage for a buttonhole. If a dispenser required something that could not be transferred on their person, it would be waiting on site at pre-designated coordinates transported by the dispenser's apprentice. "Hi, love," said Jeannie. "I read your brief, rather you than me. Jesus, Gwenny." "Yeah, I know. It's a shit job, but someone's got to do it." Jeannie laughed. This was their standard and sometimes only exchange. Jeannie held a black quilted Chanel clutch with an American Express card already in it, a large roll of €500 notes, some mascara, a silver comb, some hairpins and a small bottle of perfume. Gwendolen stood in the middle of the floor and held her arms above her head. Jeannie quickly stripped the dispenser down to her underwear and pulled a black crepe de chine mini-dress over Gwendolen's head. Jeannie then placed a pair of high heels in front of the dispenser's toes. Gwendolen stepped out of her flats and into a pair of Manolo Blahniks that, despite looking tortuous, fit like a slipper. Jeannie then strapped a slim Piaget watch around Gwendolen's wrist and handed her a pair of gold clip-on earrings, which she secured to her lobes. Gwendolen checked her appearance in all the mirrors, surveying the front and then her behind to make sure the pleating was hanging in proper folds. Gwendolen then picked up the purse from the counter and removed the bobby pins, putting them into her mouth. She shook her hair into a shaggy mane and then pulled it into a loose chignon, securing it in 3 places and pulling free a couple of tendrils. She once again checked her appearance and decided to remove her bra. The fabric of the dress was too clingy for underwear. Gwendolen then sprayed a few squirts of perfume into her cleavage, and as a final touch she applied mascara to her already long lashes and a beige lip liner to enhance her pout. "Take care, Gwenny," said Jeannie before disappearing into the back room. Another dispenser was scheduled to leave for the Vatican around the same time. He needed robes, rosary beads and a little skin modification to make him look a well-worn 70-ish. As Gwendolen exited the closet, her apprentice Lorena burst in. Lorena smiled at the beautiful dispenser, who looked stunning in her black micro mini. Lorena was determined that one day she too would enter the closet and come out in costume, whether it be a cocktail dress or khaki camos. Lorena loved Gwendolen, whom she thought beautiful but also caring and never easy to ruffle, even though she was always being asked to do such horrible things. Lorena had graduated level 1, all but circumvented level 2, and now, as a fresh-faced level 3 between physical lives, was considered something of an anomaly by her guide because, while earthbound, she had not succumbed to the seduction of the anti-force, even when faced with the choices that would have made this an easy option for most. During every life review afterwards, there hadn't been much to say other than, "Well done, Lorena." It was understood early on that Lorena would not need the same scope of training as those less receptive to the beauty of Melchizedek's plan. Millions of souls with poor karma needed priority womb assignment, however, and would remain ahead of Lorena, so she knew that the wait for her next life in the physical would be long. In the interim, Cain had offered Lorena a position Starside at the Department of Karmic Justice as apprentice. Her role to assist with whatever Gwendolen needed as she prepared for her missions. Lorena had just said goodbye to a dispenser who was doing a double, one in Limerick, Ireland, the other in Manchester, England. Only very advanced dispensers were able to be in 2 places at once, running each mission concurrently with a high degree of functionality in both. To perform in 2 places simultaneously, sometimes 3 or 4, the dispenser's focus had to be razor sharp and maintained without lapse. Gwendolen would not be splitting her consciousness for her upcoming mission because it called for a full application of energy, undecaffeinated as it was known in the trade. Due to the stringency of pre-transfer protocols, conversation between Gwendolen and Lorena had to be kept to a minimum, and the young apprentice, as usual, had to withhold the 1,000 questions resting on the tip of her tongue. Lorena had always had a hard time not staring at Gwendolen, but Gwendolen never seemed to mind, meeting Lorena's puppy gaze with an affectionate smile. Gwendolen's upcoming mission would be an ad-lib affair, and it would only be after the dispenser's return that she might get the juicy details. She knew emergency extractions were never predictable or pleasant, and so juicy was the right word. Lorena and Gwendolen walked in silence down the windowless corridor towards Transfer Room 9, a small boxy room. The only piece of furniture was a long white settee that vibrated as if the molecules were dancing with space in between them. Gwendolen lowered herself onto the settee and swung her legs up, resting her head on the arm. She then adjusted her position until she was comfortable. Her purse was now on her tummy. Lorena's only function was to watch, absorb and learn. When Lorena was not shadowing transfers, she was required to practice the levels of meditation necessary for her future role as dispenser. "Good luck, Gwen," whispered Lorena. Gwendolen blew her apprentice a kiss and closed her eyes. Her eyelashes looked like black caterpillars resting on the tip of her cheeks. Gwendolen then centred her attention until a vacant mind of pure awareness was her only identification. It was then that the image of the destination she sought took form. 7 seconds later, Gwendolen was in Vido Pontevedra, Spain, in the toilet stall of the Palacio del Oceano Hotel. Lorena left the room, closing the door behind her, and walked back to the briefing room. Her shift was almost over, and now all she could think about was cuddling up to her boyfriend Thaddeus. They had been together for a couple of years now, but his work commitments meant that their time together was often cut short. Lorena understood and accepted that her boyfriend was on call 24/7, but it meant that every time they were together, it always felt like the first date. Thaddeus had once possessed a spirit as restless as his girlfriend's, but that was a long time ago. Now his sense of duty was well cultivated due to Thaddeus being a much older soul, as well as having to exist under the watchful gaze of all those subordinates who looked at him to set a standard. Thaddeus headed the Department of Weather Management, and the precise nature of the work did not allow for any kind of rule-bending. So, when Lorena confessed her frustration at not being able to revisit Earth any time soon, Thaddeus was confused. "Why Earth, for God's sake? When work slows down a bit, I'll take you to a whole host of other places far more interesting. I'll blow that curious little mind of yours, and all you might want to do after that is sit in a quiet room for 20 years. Over time, Thaddeus had come to understand the essence of his girlfriend's nature. She was a pure and free spirit with a sense of adventure that he had once indulged, but he did not think she would compromise the smooth flow of Starside's operations to assuage juvenile impulses, which meant he did not know her at all. With a bunch of dispensers carrying out their duties on Earth, the briefing room was relatively quiet. Lorena sat down in one of the recliners and began leafing through a magazine with a picture of Princess Diana on the cover. She was holding a bundled-up newborn baby and standing next to her prince, who was dressed formally. Lorena and Diana knew each other well, and Lorena had not been surprised when Diana, a level 5, had revealed the details of her upcoming life she had planned. Diana had chosen her current life, and as with souls with exceptional karma, she had opted for glamour, prestige, fame and an early exit. Diana was very serious about wanting to overcome her long-held shyness, and this lifetime would certainly help with that, thought Lorena. Lorena continued to flip the pages and saw a mugshot of a young starlet arrested for something or other. On the surface it looked like she had a good life, but deep insecurities and the chronic need for attention had bled over from several previous existences and had influenced every choice she made. Lorena felt sorry for her because she understood that breaking mental strangleholds could be a very difficult thing to do. Lorena was waiting for Gwendolen to get back, idling away the time by leafing through another magazine, when her watch chimed. The text on the small glass screen was from Thaddeus. A very precise seismic shift ordered for tonight. Can't escape. Sorry, tomorrow night. XOXOXO. Lorena sighed, disappointed that she would not be seeing her boyfriend after her shift. She sent him a smiley face and a bunch of hearts, with the words, "I understand, it's tough at the top." After brewing a fresh pot of coffee and emptying a few trash cans, Lorena sat down and closed her eyes. It was only 6:30. Lorena began to think about what she might do to fill her evening, when a sudden and exceptionally vivid image of Gwendolen in her little black dress came into her mind's eye. What was Gwendolen up to in Spain? And what was every other dispenser up to wherever they were? She wondered where her friend Starsy was. Starsy was a retriever, and her job in Limbo Land was exciting and unpredictable. Lorena then looked at the cover of the magazine on the table and thought about Diana and her life with the prince. And it was at that moment that something that felt like abandon swept over her. Lorena got up from the chair and walked over to the drawer where the dispensers dumped the excess contents of their pockets and purses. She found exactly what she was looking for, loose banknotes. After sifting through them, Lorena exited the briefing room with a single-minded resolve to follow Gwendolen and take herself off on a brief adventure. She knew to do this was taboo. Earth was totally off limits for casual adventures, but Lorena felt a childlike defiance which, for some reason, she was unable or unwilling to quash.